students, today we'll be discussing the topic Politics, Ethics and Good Governance in the Mahabharata. The objective of today's discussion is to give you an insight and understanding into the elements of good governance contained in the Mahabharata. We would also get an understanding of the linkage between politics and ethics, as well as how morality can be a founding principle of good governance. For the convenience of discussion, I have divided the entire area into 3 segments. We would move on with introducing the text, then we would try to understand the concept of good governance and the key elements of good governance, and finally, we would focus on the principles of good governance enunciated in the Mahabharata. Now, let us first try to understand what is this text? Why is this text so very important for understanding principles of good governance? The Mahabharata is the longest epic poem written by sage Vyas. It is also called the Shatosahasri Samahita. It primarily focuses on 18 parvas. Though the epic concentrates on the rivalry between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, our point of concentration and discussion would be the Shanti parva, which is essentially a discourse between Pitamaha Bhishma and Yudhishthir on the art and craft of governance and administration. Students, the Mahabharata is not just an epic, it is a treatise of life. It contains principles and discourses on statecraft, administration, ethics, governance, punishment, law and order, as well as philosophy of life. The Shanti Parva is essentially the 12th Parva, and it is divided into a number of sub-Parvas. The Shanti Parva consists of 365 chapters. The first sub-Parva is the Dharma Anushasana Parva, which essentially focuses on the duties, responsibilities and obligations of the king. The second sub-Parva is the Dharma Anushasana Parva, which focuses on the obligations of the king during times of calamity and distress. The third sub-Parva of the Shanti Parva is the Moksha Dharma Parva, which deals with emancipation and renunciation. Now, the Shanti Parva essentially focuses on rules and duties of the king. The question, however, is whether this text can be considered to be a manual of good governance. For that, we need to understand what is good governance, what are the principles of good governance, and whether these principles were found in the text. Students, we know that since ancient times, the main function of the state was to govern. However, with the dawn of globalization, good governance has become the buzzword. The task of the state is not simply to govern, but to govern efficiently and effectively, being receptive to the needs of the people. This is governance, students. Good governance is essentially a citizen-friendly governmental system. In the modern parlance, governance refers to a set of principles designed to make government efficient, effective, and responsive to the needs of the people. Governance is not just welfare administration, students. It is the process of decision making and a manner in which the decisions are taken effectively. It also refers to a high level of organizational effectiveness and citizen responsiveness. In simple terms, good governance considers citizens to be the center of administration. Now, students, ancient Indian political texts emphasize on monarchy as the most popular form of government. This was not just in India, when monarchy was prevalent and popular, but also in the West. Ancient times was a period when the law was considered to be the command of the sovereign. The king had absolute powers to rule and govern. But could the king rule arbitrarily? This is what we would be focusing today. Whether the king had to be responsive to the needs of the citizenry or not. Good governance essentially focuses on citizen responsive administrative system. Let us come to the features of good governance. Now, it has been observed that certain key essential features are required. For example, participation, responsiveness, accountability, efficiency, effectiveness, equity, rule of law, consensus orientation, and a strategic vision. Let us briefly understand what all these principles stand for. Participation refers to a system of governance where people are given a chance to contribute in decision making. People can contribute directly or indirectly in decision making procedures. This calls for decentralized governmental system. Such broad participation entails freedom of association, freedom of speech, and it builds up the capacity of the people and makes them a part of the governmental system. The second essential of good governance is rule of law. The principle that legal framework should be fair and enforced with impartiality. There should be no discrimination between the high and the low, the rich and the poor, in terms of delivering justice. The third principle of good governance focuses on transparency. Rules, laws, procedures should be clearly coded. The government should be responsive and transparent in letting the people know its decisions and information about the institutional functioning. Enough data should be provided to the people so that the people would also have an understanding of the functioning of the government. Except confidential matters, secrecy should be avoided by the government to establish transparency in decision making. The next important element of good governance is responsiveness. The government should be responsive to the needs and aspirations of the people. In other words, the processes of government should try to serve all the stakeholders. It also entails that laws, rules, procedures should be citizen friendly. It should be framed in a language which the citizen can understand it easily. There should be a political will which should be responsive to cater to the demands and aspirations of the people. The next important feature of good governance is consensus orientation. Most democracies believe in majoritarian method of decision making. However, in the interest of all, decisions should be arrived at after proper consensus. In fact, the different interests of different segments of the society should be accommodated. There should be no marginalization of interests. In simple terms, the best interests of all should be catered to. Equity, another important principle of good governance, entails that all men and women should be given equal opportunities. There should be sufficient procedures and administrative framework available to ensure that all can avail the different governmental procedures. Welfare principle should not be confined to a chosen few. Rather, it should aim at the well-being of one and all. And the next important feature of good governance is efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency refers to optimum utilization of available resources. We should use the resources of the state in such a way that it creates the greatest good of the greatest number. Effectiveness refers to responsiveness of the public servants in proper delivery of services. The civil servants should be honest, should possess integrity and sincerity in order to serve the public. Effectiveness entails that the processes and institutions of the government should meet the needs of all while making the best use of available resources. The next important principle of good governance is accountability. The decision makers should be accountable and answerable to the public for the decisions that they take and the performance of their functions. And it is not just the government. The private sector should also be answerable and accountable to the different stakeholders. In fact, there should be an essential linkage between the political representatives, policy makers, service providers, and the general public. The general public should know what the government is doing. Finally, students, good governance entails a strategic vision. The policy makers should have a broad and long-term perspective, keeping in mind human development concerns and a sense of the need to enhance the well-being of one and all. Thus, students, these are the quintessentials of good governance. Now, let us try to understand whether these good governance principles could be found in a text written centuries ago. Can these principles be deciphered in the Shanti Parva on the Mahabharata? Let us first start with Raj Dharma, which is considered to be the most important function of the state in the Shanti Parva. The Raj Dharma, or the duties of the king, speak about different obligations and responsibilities of the ruler during normal times and during times of distress and calamity. In fact, the epic enumerates in great detail how the king should be accountable and answerable to the people, how the king should take decisions in the interest of all, how it was the dharma of the king to maintain the caste orders. The Shanti Parva also states that the king had to take the advice not only of the council of ministers, but also of influential people, common people, before taking decisions. So, Raj Dharma can be considered to be a precept of good governance. The king was considered to be the center of administration. Raj Dharma entailed almost all the principles of good governance that we just referred to. It was the duty of the king to be responsive, accountable, answerable, efficient in the discharge of his functions. He should be free and fair in dispensing justice. In fact, the king should be benevolent and strict according to the needs of time. The second principle of good governance that we find in the Mahabharata is emphasis on the concept of Dharma. Dharma is said to be the basis of society and polity in ancient India and during the times of Mahabharata in particular. Dharma is not a religion, it is a code of conduct, a set of rules and regulations for both the ruler as well as the ruled. Dharma refers to principles of rule of law, truthfulness, sincerity, justice, benevolence. In fact, it was an attitude of equality of the king towards all. It entailed simplicity of character on the part of the king. It also entailed gentleness, modesty, generosity. In fact, Dharma referred to a set of ethical principles, equity, which was considered to be an important principle of good governance and administration in the Mahabharata. The next important principle of good governance is Dunda. Dunda refers to the coercive power of the state. The fear of punishment entails people to obey the rules and regulations. But then students, Dunda cannot be unfair. Dunda as punishment should be delivered by the king after listening to both the parties. Dunda should be as deserved. In fact, the modern day principle of rule of law resembles Dunda in many respects. In fact, the Shanti Parva focuses on Matsanaya, a state of anarchy in the absence of Danda. Similarly, in modern times, rule of law entails the creation of a peaceful and just society. The next important principle of good governance is accountability. In fact, we find the strong principle of accountability of the king towards his subjects. The king is supposed to act in the bounds of Dharma, and there has been a list of duties, do's and don'ts for the king. In fact, the king is accountable to the people for the maintenance of the social order. The Shanti Parva enumerates two very important powers of the king to maintain accountability. One is Nigraha, the other one is Anugraha. Nigraha is his power to command, to control. Anugraha is the power of compassion. Through Nigraha, he would be able to check the miscreants' wicked elements. Through Anugraha, he would be able to win the trust of the subjects, and trust, students, is an important element of good governance. The next important aspect of good governance is consensus orientation and accountability. In fact, it was quite considered to be revolutionary in the time of Mahabharata to arrive at decisions after entailing consensus. The cabinet of the king should comprise of people represented from all the varnas. There would be representatives of the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. Decisions after they have been taken should be disseminated among the people. Public opinion should be listened to, and a decision should be taken only after there was a favorable public opinion on that law or issue. In fact, there was such a strong sense of accountability that people had the right to revolt against an unjust king. People could slay a king who dishonored or did not defend the interest of the people and the kingdom. Next, we move on to efficiency. Mahabharata emphasizes on efficient administrative system. It focuses on the need of discipline for the king. In fact, the Mahabharata details the qualities necessary for an able ruler. This is important because if governance is to be effective, the ruler has to be absolutely efficient in the discharge of his functions. The ruler should also ensure that the council of ministers comprise of people who are men of caliber, efficiency, integrity and honest. And this can happen only when the ruler is efficient and he can handle all situations and take decisions effectively. A king who tries to discipline his subjects without disciplining himself will become an object of ridicule. Transparency. The king should try to cultivate diligently maintenance of dharma, securing wealth without coercion, and ensuring that the king remains committed to himself, to the services of the nation. In fact, the Mahabharata candidly opines that the rulers, if they are corrupt, if they are indifferent to the needs and interests of the people, that is not a good state of affairs. There should be transparency in collection of revenue, which was fixed at 1/6 of the total income of the people. The people should be made aware of how the king is using the revenue. What are the different areas where the revenue is being spent? So there should be transparency in financial administration also. Something quite interesting in an age where the king was considered to be an absolute sovereign. The Mahabharata also focuses on impartiality and justice. The king should not discriminate between members of the royal family and common people. Anyone who commits a crime, irrespective of family and lineage, should be punished in accordance with the nature of the law of the land. Next, the Mahabharata focuses on equity, the need for observing principles of justice to ensure trust and truthfulness among the people. It is only when the king has heard without prejudice both the sides, that he can ensure equity and justice in his kingdom. The Mahabharata also focuses on participatory administration. The teachings of the Mahabharata is replete with examples of village administration, village councils, where people will have the right to self-government. In every village, there would be 5 persons who would be honest, just, brave, know their duties, and they would be ruling the village with efficiency. But yes, they would be answerable to the king for the performance of the functions. It is said that when the villages are self-sufficient, a state would prosper. Finally, the Mahabharata focuses on morality and ethics as the base of governance. Good governance has its base on ethical principles. It is only when the government is based on philosophy of life, Dharma, that it can entail public confidence and trust. Contemporary times also demand the need for citizen responsive, friendly administrative system. Centuries ago, the Mahabharata recognized the need to have a transparent, responsive, just and equitable administrative system. In fact, the entire principles of good governance contained in the Mahabharata is based on the twin foundation of Dharma and Dunda. Dunda was essential for the maintenance of rule of law and preventing the wicked from devouring the weak. The king should have a strategic vision. Good governance can only be provided by a ruler who possesses noble qualities, self-discipline. Kingship was considered to be benevolent, paternalistic autocracy, bound by many instructions and of service to the people. The king should uphold the well-being of all, and in order to do that, he should have a long-term vision of how he is going to meet the developmental needs, at the same time the welfare needs of the people. The king should involve the entire populace in their respective duties and should ensure that all the people do the duties which are assigned to them. Coming to impartiality, nobody was above the law of the land. The Shanti Parva directs the king to appoint people of caliber, integrity, reason, compassion, efficiency, reliability, to ensure that they are trustworthy. Only when they are trustworthy and sincere can we have ethical governance in place. A king should never punish a person unless he had listened to both the sides. He should never walk on the path of adharma and oppress his subjects. The subordinate officials should behave in a proper manner. And only when the king discharges his responsibilities in the interest of all, that we can have community well-being and a prosperous state. The Mahabharata students is called an itihasa. It transcends age and time. It contains valuable principles of governance and statecraft. Let us quickly move on to specific good governance principles in the Mahabharata. Participation can be contained in village administration. Transparency can be found in the king's rule according to Dharma, decisions disseminated among the people. Responsiveness can be found in the king ruling in the interest of the people. Rule of law can be found in the principles of Dharma and Dunda. Equity can be found in social justice, the king being non-discriminatory while dispensing Dunda. Consensus orientation can be found how decisions are taken after listening to different segments of the society. Accountability, wherein the king is answerable for all his actions and the people have the right to remove a king if he adopted unjust procedures and laws. Efficiency and effectiveness came in through law and order, composition of the cabinet, and the functioning of the state. Let us now see what the Mahabharata offers as a manual of good governance. We found that the quintessential of good governance, which is maximization of citizen welfare, was strongly capsulated in the Mahabharata. We also find that good governance principles were based on Dharma and Dunda. Essentially, morality was the basis of statecraft and administration. The primary duty of the king was to ensure happiness of the subjects. Able governance would lead to the creation of a prosperous state, and for that the Mahabharata emphasized on transparency, responsiveness, efficiency, and an effective administrative system. In fact, the Mahabharata goes a step further by popularizing participatory administrative system where the people would be involved in administrative matters. Finally, the Mahabharata focuses on the importance of public opinion. Consensus to be arrived at only when the people agree to obey the rules and obligations put forth by the king. In fact, the importance of public opinion was emphasized again and again in the text. Summing up our today's discussion, we learnt what is good governance, what are the specific principles of good governance. We also learned how Mahabharata and Shanti Parva in particular focuses on different principles of good governance. A text written and composed centuries ago, when the term good governance was unheard of, was popular in different principles of Dharma and Dunda. It proves that ancient Indian political thought stressed on a citizen-friendly administrative system. Governance was based on morality, ethics, and it was believed that a just state was a well-governed state, and a well-governed state provided and popularized principles of good governance. Thank you.